John Carter sat at his small desk in his college dorm room, chewing on the end of his pencil. The math problem in front of him wasn't that hard. It was late, and he was tired, but he needed to finish this homework before morning. His roommate, Pete, was already asleep, snoring softly on the other side of the room. John's phone buzzed. He picked it up and saw an email from an address he didn't know. The subject line read, Galactic Exchange Initiative Application Status. John frowned. He had almost forgotten about that application. 3 months ago, he had filled out a form for the new exchange program with the aliens who had made contact with Earth 2 years earlier. Probably just telling me I didn't get in, John muttered. He opened the email anyway. The message was simple. Congratulations, John Carter. You have been selected to represent Earth in the Galactic Exchange Initiative. Please report to the Houston Spaceport on Friday, May 15th at 0800 hours. Pack for a 6-month stay. Further instructions will be provided upon arrival. John read the email 3 times. This had to be a joke. He was just an average engineering student at Midwestern State University. Not brilliant, not terrible. Just average. Why would they pick him? He called the number at the bottom of the email. After several rings, a woman answered. United Earth Space Agency, Exchange Division. How may I help you? Hi, my name is John Carter. I just got an email saying I was selected for the alien exchange thing. Is this real? There was typing on the other end? John Carter, Midwestern. State, engineering major? Yes, you're on the list. Congratulations. But why me? I'm not even in the top of my class. The woman chuckled. That's exactly why, Mr. Carter, the Galactic Confederation specifically requested students who represent the average human academic experience. Not our best, not our worst. They want to see how typical humans perform in their educational system. John couldn't believe it. In 3 days he would be going to space. To study with aliens. Friday came quickly. John said goodbye to his parents and his younger sister, who hugged him tightly and made him promise to take pictures. At the Houston Spaceport, he met the other 11 students selected from around the world. They were all like him, good students, but not exceptional ones. A tall woman in a blue uniform introduced herself as Captain Linda Wells. Welcome to the first human class of the Galactic Exchange Initiative. You'll be traveling on a Confederation vessel to the Nexus Station Academy. The journey will take approximately 6 days. During that time, you'll receive basic orientation and language assistance. Though most Confederation species have agreed to use translation devices for this program, the Confederation ship was like nothing John had ever seen. It was smooth and white with no visible engines or windows. Inside, the gravity felt slightly lighter than Earth's, and the air smelled clean but strange. Like ozone after a thunderstorm, the human students were given small quarters with beds that adjusted to their bodies. John shared his room with 3 other students, Amir from Egypt, Sato from Japan, and Maria from Brazil. They spent the journey learning about the Confederation and the many species that were part of it. Most Confederation worlds are what they call garden worlds, explained Dr. Freeman, their human guide. Planets with moderate gravity, stable weather, and limited natural disasters. Earth is classified as a death world due to our high gravity. Extreme weather patterns, high levels of background radiation, and abundant natural disasters. So we're the tough guys? Asked Maria with a smile. Dr. Freeman nodded. In a way, yes. Humans evolved in conditions that would kill most Confederation species. They find us fascinating, but also a bit frightening. Be prepared for some ... curiosity. After 6 days, they arrived at Nexus Station. It was a massive structure, a rotating wheel in space with spokes leading to a central hub. The human students stared in wonder as they disembarked. The docking bay was filled with aliens of all shapes and sizes. Some looked almost human, while others were completely different, floating gas bags. Crystalline structures, multi-limbed creatures with no clear front or back. John felt his heart race. This was real. He was going to study with these beings. They were led to their new living quarters. Each human would room with 3 aliens to encourage cultural exchange. John's room was larger than he expected. With 4 distinct areas designed for different physiological needs, his roommates arrived one by one. First came Xilox, a floating creature that seemed to be made of transparent sacs filled with swirling blue gas. It used a translation device that hung in the air near it. Greetings, Human John. I am Xilox, third-cycle mathematics specialist from Pertax. I breathe methane, so I will maintain my environmental seal when you are present. Next was Vrika, a being that looked like a walking crystal formation with pulsing lights inside. Its voice came directly from its translating device. Human John, I am Vrika of the Lumidian Collective. My species communicates through light patterns, but I will use this device to speak with you. I require minimal rest and consume energy through photosynthesis. The third roommate was Telmer, an amphibious creature with webbed hands and large, bulbous eyes. Its skin was a pale green with blue spots. Hello, John of Earth. I am Telmer, biology student from Aquilia. I must submerge in water every 6 hours, but otherwise, my needs are similar to yours. I eat solid food and sleep lying down. John introduced himself, feeling awkward and out of place. Hi, I'm John Carter from Earth. I'm studying engineering. I breathe oxygen, eat food, and sleep about 8 hours per day. Your species requires so much rest, Vrika said, lights pulsing inside its crystal body. How inefficient. Earth gravity is nearly twice what I am accustomed to, Telmer said, looking John up and down. Your muscle density must be remarkable. And your oxygen requirements are quite high, added Xilox, its gas sacs expanding and contracting. The station has adjusted your living area accordingly. Later that day, all new students gathered for orientation. Professor Narlax, a being with 8 limbs and a hard exoskeleton, welcomed them. Students of the Confederation, we gather today to begin a new academic cycle. This year, we welcome our first human exchange students. John noticed how the alien students turned to look at the humans. Some seemed curious, others wary. Humans come from a Class 9 death world, Professor Narlax continued. Their planet has high gravity, extreme temperature variations, high oxygen content, frequent natural disasters, and dangerous wildlife. They have evolved under conditions that most of us would find impossible to survive. The room filled with murmurs and the equivalent of whispers from various species. However, the professor continued, they are here to learn alongside you, to share knowledge and perspectives. They will take the same courses and face the same challenges as any other student. As they left the orientation, John overheard 2 alien students talking. A real Deathworlder in our class. Do you think they're as dangerous as they say? My parent unit told me their bones are reinforced with calcium deposits. They can survive injuries that would kill most species. John pretended not to hear. He caught up with his roommates, who were discussing their course selections. I am taking advanced quantum mathematics, Xilox said, its gas sacs pulsing with what John guessed was excitement. Xenobiology and comparative physiology for me, said Telmer. I am particularly interested in studying how species adapt to harsh environments. Vrika's crystal body flashed with patterns. I will study theoretical physics and energy systems. They all looked at John, waiting. I signed up for engineering. Principles and materials science, he said. Pretty standard stuff. Do not worry if you find the courses challenging, Vrika said kindly. The faculty understands humans have certain limitations. John smiled politely, but inside he felt determined. He hadn't come across the galaxy to be treated like he was less capable. He would show them what a human could do that night as his roommates entered their various rest states. John looked out the small viewport in their quarters. Stars stretched out before him, more than he had ever seen from Earth. He was the first Carter to leave Earth, the first to study among the stars. Whatever challenges came, he would face them. That's what humans did. 3 weeks passed quickly at the Nexus Station Academy. John settled into a routine with his alien roommates. They were curious about Earth and asked many questions. John showed them pictures of mountains, oceans, and cities. They seemed most interested in Earth's weather. You mean water just falls from the sky, regularly? Asked Telmer, his large eyes blinking rapidly. Yeah, we call it rain. It happens all the time in most places, John explained. And sometimes frozen water falls instead? Vrika's crystal body flashed with patterns that John had learned meant. Surprise, snow, hail, sleet. Different kinds of frozen water, yeah. Zilox's gas sacs expanded. And humans just go outside during these events? John nodded. We use umbrellas or wear coats, but yeah, life doesn't stop because of weather. His roommates exchanged what John recognized as looks of disbelief, though. On very different faces, classes were challenging but interesting. John had to work harder than he ever had on Earth. The concepts were similar to what he had studied before, but the Confederation's approach to engineering was different. They focused on elegant, perfect solutions rather than practical ones that simply worked. In the engineering principles class, John met other human students. They often studied together, helping each other understand the alien perspectives on familiar concepts. They overthink everything, said Maria from Brazil during one study session. On Earth, we just use a backup generator. Here, they design systems that never fail in the first place. Different evolution, different approach, Amir pointed out. They never had to survive on worlds like ours. The class that challenged John most was quantum mechanics, taught by Professor Kelther. The old Volturian moved slowly, his body supported by a hover platform. He breathed through a special mask that made his voice sound deep and rumbling. He was known throughout the academy for being brilliant but harsh. The universe does not care about your feelings, Professor Kelther often said. It cares only about the elegance of its own laws. On the 21st day of classes, Professor Kelther hovered at the front of the lecture hall. The room fell silent as he surveyed the students with his 4 black eyes. Today, he announced, I assign your first major project. The students straightened in their seats. First projects were famous for setting the tone for the entire semester. Your task, Professor Kelther continued, is to design a functional solution to the Krell paradox using only the materials in standard emergency kits found on Class C interstellar vessels. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. John looked around, confused by the reaction. He leaned toward a neighboring student, a 6-limbed being named Rax. What's the Krell paradox? John whispered. Rax's antennae twitched. A famous problem in quantum gravitational engineering. It involves 13 dimensions and usually requires specialized equipment to solve. Professor Kelther continued. You have 4 standard cycles to complete your designs. This will account for 40% of your final evaluation. As they left the lecture hall, John saw worry on the faces of all students, alien and human alike. Back in their quarters, John's roommates were in various states of distress. Zilox's gas sacs were inflating and deflating rapidly. Vrika's crystal body had dimmed to a dull glow. Telmer's skin had turned a pale blue. This is impossible, Zilox wheezed. The Krell paradox requires a 13-dimensional approach. No one has ever solved it with limited materials. Perhaps it's a test of character, suggested Vrika. To see if we recognize impossible parameters, what exactly is this paradox? John asked, sitting down at his desk and turning on his tablet. Telmar explained, the Krell paradox occurs when quantum fields interact with gravitational forces across multiple dimensions. It creates a cascade effect that theoretically could tear apart spacetime. And we need to solve it using only emergency kit materials? John asked, already searching for information about standard emergency kits on Class C vessels. That's what makes it impossible, Zilox said. Emergency kits contain basic medical supplies, some tools, emergency rations, communication devices, and survival gear. Nothing that could possibly address 13 dimensions of quantum gravitational interactions. John found a list of items in a standard emergency kit and began reading. What if we don't need to solve all 13 dimensions at once? His roommates looked at him with what he had learned was their version of confusion. All 13 dimensions must be addressed simultaneously, Vrika explained slowly, as if to a child. Otherwise, the paradox collapses into a singularity. John wasn't convinced. On Earth, when we face impossible problems, we often look for workarounds. Let me research this more. While his roommates began drafting formal appeals to the faculty council, arguing that the assignment was impossible, John dug deeper into both the Krell paradox and emergency kits. The next morning, the entire class was buzzing with talk of the assignment. Study groups formed to prepare appeals. Some students even tried to switch out of the class. John noticed that none of them were actually trying to solve the problem. When John returned to class later that day, Professor Kelther addressed the growing concerns. "I am aware many of you believe the assignment to be impossible," he said, his breathing apparatus hissing between words. "Let me be clear, I do not assign tasks that cannot be completed. The solution may not be what you expect, but it exists." This calmed some students, but most remained skeptical. John heard debates in the hallways about what the professor really meant. Was there a trick? A hidden message? That evening, John stayed in the academy's library long after most students had left. He found old research papers on the Krell paradox and studied them carefully. Most approaches did indeed try to solve all 13 dimensions at once, using complex equipment and massive energy sources, but one paper, written by a professor from a species known for surviving on a moderately harsh world, suggested a different approach. The paper was largely dismissed by the scientific community, but it gave John an idea. When he returned to his quarters, his roommates were surprised to see him smiling. "You seem pleased," Telmer observed. "Have you decided on your appeal strategy?" "I'm not going to appeal," John said, setting up his tablet and pulling up a blank design document. "I'm going to solve it." Zilox's gas sacs expanded, and what John had learned was laughter. Human John, even the Arcturian Science Directorate declared it theoretically impossible without specialized quantum manipulation tools. "Maybe by their methods," John agreed. "But I'm thinking of a different approach." "What approach?" Vrika asked, crystal body pulsing with curiosity. John grinned. "On Earth we have a saying, if you can't go through the front door, try the window. I'm going to find another way in." For the next 3 days, John barely left their quarters. He slept only a few hours each night, surviving on the meal packets the Academy provided and what humans called coffee, but what the food synthesizers labeled mild stimulant beverage, human safe. His roommates watched with a mixture of concern and curiosity as he worked nonstop, creating diagrams, running calculations, and occasionally talking to himself. "Your biology allows you to go without proper rest cycles?" Telmer asked on the second day, watching John down his 4th cup of coffee. "Not forever," John admitted. "But we can push ourselves when necessary." "Fascinating and disturbing," commented Vrika. By the end of the 3rd day, while other students were finalizing their appeals or attempting partial solutions, John had filled dozens of pages with notes and diagrams. His eyes were red from lack of sleep, but he wore a satisfied smile. "I think I've got it," he said to his roommates who had just returned from a study group. "Got what?" Zilox asked, floating closer to see John's work. "A solution to the Krell paradox using only emergency kit materials." His roommates exchanged glances. "May we see?" Telmer asked politely, clearly not believing John had actually solved it. John showed them his design. It was unlike anything in the Confederation engineering texts. Instead of trying to address all 13 dimensions at once, John had designed a system that rapidly cycled through dimensional sets, creating what he called a temporal buffer using the emergency kit's radiation blanket and medical scanner. This approach, it doesn't address the 13 dimensions as required, Zilox pointed out. "Not simultaneously," John agreed. "But it cycles through them fast enough to create the same effect." "The components would burn out quickly," Vrika observed. John nodded. "Yes, after about 6 minutes. But that's enough time to resolve the paradox effects." "But the equipment would be destroyed," Telmer said, sounding shocked. "Sometimes you have to sacrifice equipment to save lives," John said with a shrug. "In emergencies, we use what we have how we need to, for as long as we need to." His roommates didn't seem convinced, but John submitted his design anyway, just before the deadline. As he finally lay down to sleep, he wondered if he had completely misunderstood the assignment. Maybe the Confederation approach was so different from Earth's that his solution would be seen as completely wrong. Either way, he would find out soon. The day of the project presentations arrived. John had slept for nearly 14 hours after completing his design, missing his morning classes. His roommates had let him sleep, though Telmer had seemed concerned about the human's unusual rest. When John finally woke up, he found a message from Professor Kelther on his tablet. It was short: all students with submitted projects will present their work today at 4th cycle in the main lecture hall. John checked the time. He had just 2 hours to prepare. He quickly showered, ate, and reviewed his design one last time. He still wasn't sure if his approach would be accepted, but he was proud of what he had created. The lecture hall was more crowded than usual. In addition to the students, several other faculty members were present. John even noticed a few beings wearing the insignia of the Confederation Science Directorate, their formal attire marking them as important visitors. Professor Kelther hovered at the front of the room. "We will proceed in alphabetical order by species designation," he announced. "Each student or group will have 5 minutes to present their solution or appeal." This meant humans would be somewhere in the middle of the presentations. John sat back and watched as various alien students presented their work. Most had prepared formal appeals. They argued that the Krell paradox could not be solved with emergency kit materials and provided detailed proofs explaining why. Some suggested modifications to the assignment to make it possible. A few brave groups had attempted partial solutions, addressing some aspects of the paradox but acknowledging they couldn't fully resolve it. Professor Kelther listened to each presentation without comment, his 4 black eyes unblinking, his breathing apparatus making a steady hissing sound. When the first human group was called, they presented an appeal similar to the alien students, arguing that the problem was unsolvable as stated. John realized he might be the only one who had actually tried to solve the paradox rather than appeal it. Finally, it was John's turn. He walked to the front of the room, feeling every eye on him. He connected his tablet to the display system, and his design appeared as a holographic image in the center of the room. "My solution to the Krell paradox," John began, "uses only components found in standard Class C vessel emergency kits." A murmur rippled through the audience. John saw his roommates exchange glances. Vrika's crystal body pulsed with what John had learned was the equivalent of concern. "The traditional approach to the Krell paradox assumes we need to resolve all 13 dimensions simultaneously," John explained. "But I realize that's not the only way to approach the problem." He zoomed in on part of his design. "I've created a sequential resolver that addresses 3 dimensions at a time, cycling through dimensional sets using a temporal buffer." One of the Science Directorate members leaned forward. "That would create dangerous instabilities between dimensional transitions," John nodded. "It would if the transitions weren't managed properly. But by reconfiguring the emergency medical scanner to emit a specific frequency pattern, we can create a stabilizing field during the transitions." He showed the next part of his design. "The radiation blanket from the emergency kit can be modified to serve as a containment field while the emergency beacon's power cell provides the energy." "This approach would destroy the equipment," said another faculty member. "Yes," John admitted. "After approximately 6 minutes, the components would burn out. But that's enough time to resolve the paradox effects in an emergency situation." Professor Kelther raised one of his upper limbs. "Mr. Carter, are you suggesting that rather than solving the paradox directly, you've created a system that cycles through dimensional sets quickly enough to create the effect of a 13-dimensional solution?" "Not just the effect, Professor," John replied respectfully. "The results would be identical to a true 13-dimensional solution, though the process is different. The power requirements would exceed what an emergency beacon could provide," argued a Science Directorate member with 6 eyes and a translucent body. John pulled up another diagram. "Not if we modify the power cell's containment field. By allowing it to release energy at a higher rate, we get enough power for the 6 minutes we need. That would cause the power cell to explode," the alien said, sounding shocked. Not explode, John corrected. It would undergo rapid energy depletion and become inert. But again, in an emergency, if the choice is between losing equipment or losing lives, the room fell silent. Professor Kelther studied John's design for several long moments. Your solution sacrifices the very equipment meant to ensure survival. In an emergency, the professor noted. Yes, John agreed. But the assignment was to solve the Krell paradox with these materials, not to preserve them afterward. In a real emergency involving the paradox, the bigger threat would be the paradox itself, not being without emergency equipment. The Science Directorate members were whispering among themselves now. John couldn't tell if they were impressed or horrified by his approach. Professor Kelther's breathing apparatus hissed loudly as he took a deep breath. Continue with the technical specifications, Mr. Carter. John explained the rest of his design in detail. He showed how the emergency medical scanner could be recalibrated to reinforce the temporal buffer, how the communication device could be reprogrammed to coordinate the dimensional cycling, and how even the emergency rations packaging could be used as additional insulation for the overloading components. When he finished, the room remained silent. John returned to his seat, feeling a mix of pride and uncertainty. Had he completely misunderstood what the professor wanted? Was his solution too strange, too human? The remaining presentations were all appeals or partial solutions. None had attempted a complete solution like John's. As the last student finished, Professor Kelther moved to the center of the room. You have all given your responses to this assignment, he said. Now I will give mine. The room grew tense with anticipation. The Krell paradox, as presented in this assignment, was designed to be unsolvable by conventional Confederation engineering methods, Professor Kelther revealed. That was intentional. Confused murmurs spread through the room. Those who submitted appeals recognizing the impossibility of the task as presented demonstrated good understanding of conventional, quantum gravitational engineering principles. You will receive passing grades. The students who had appealed looked relieved, but still confused. Those who attempted partial solutions showed admirable creativity within the constraints of Confederation engineering philosophy. You will receive above-average grades. Now the professor turned his 4 black eyes toward John, and then there is Mr. Carter's solution. John felt his heart beating faster. Mr. Carter's approach is unorthodox, Professor Kelther stated. It violates several established principles of Confederation engineering. It is inefficient, inelegant, and ultimately destructive to the components involved. John's heart sank. He had been wrong after all. It is also, the professor continued, entirely functional. The solution would work. Gasps and exclamations filled the room. John's roommates stared at him in disbelief. But how? Demanded Xelox from across the room. The approach contradicts everything we've been taught. Professor Kelther's hover platform moved closer to the center of the room. That, students, was the true purpose of this assignment. All eyes were on the professor now. For generations, we in the Confederation have approached problems through established frameworks, using elegant, efficient solutions developed over millennia of scientific progress. But when we encountered humans, we discovered a species that evolved on a planet so harsh that most of us would consider it uninhabitable. The professor gestured toward John and the other human students. Their approach to problem-solving is shaped by their environment. When faced with danger, with death, one cannot always wait for the elegant solution. Sometimes one must create a solution that simply works, regardless of convention, John finally understood. This hadn't just been about engineering principles. It had been about different ways of thinking. As the class was dismissed, John's roommates approached him, their earlier skepticism replaced with something new. Respect, perhaps? I still do not understand how you arrived at your solution, Vrika admitted, crystal body glowing brighter than usual. John smiled. When the normal way doesn't work, we try something different. Where I come from, we call it thinking outside the box. Would you teach us this? Outside-the-box thinking? Telmer asked, skin now a healthy green again. Sure, John replied. But I should warn you, it involves a lot of coffee and late nights. As they walked back to their quarters, John thought about what Professor Kelther had said. Humans approach problems differently because of where they came from. Their harsh world had taught them to find solutions that worked even if they weren't perfect. Maybe that was what the Confederation needed, a little human creativity to complement their elegant efficiency. Word of John's unusual solution to the Krell paradox spread quickly through Nexus Station Academy. Students from other classes began to approach him in the dining hall and between classes. Some were curious, others skeptical, but all wanted to know more about the human way of thinking. John found himself explaining Earth concepts like workarounds, jury rigging, and hacking solutions to aliens who had never considered such approaches. Many were confused by the idea of sacrificing equipment or creating temporary fixes. But what about efficiency? Asked a tall, mantis-like student during lunch one day. Your solution wastes valuable resources. In an emergency, the most important resource is time, John explained. Sometimes you have to sacrifice efficiency to get a quick solution. 1 week after the presentations, John received a message from Professor Kelther. Please come to my laboratory after your classes today. Bring your project materials. John's roommates were just as curious as he was about the invitation. Perhaps he wishes to show you a more elegant solution, suggested Vrika. Or maybe he wants to study your thinking process, Zilox added. Gas sacks swirling with interest, Telmer had a different theory. The Science Directorate members were quite interested in your presentation. Perhaps they have questions. After his last class, John made his way to Professor Kelther's laboratory. It was located in a quiet section of the station, away from the main educational areas. The door slid open as John approached. Inside, he found not only Professor Kelther but also 3 members of the Science Directorate. They stood around a large table covered with equipment, including items from a standard emergency kit. Mr. Carter, Professor Kelther greeted him. Thank you for coming. These representatives from the Science Directorate would like to see a practical demonstration of your solution. John looked at the table in surprise. You want me to actually build it? If you can, said one of the Directorate members, a tall being with silver skin and no visible eyes. We have reviewed your design extensively and wish to see it in operation. John nodded slowly. I can build it, but as I mentioned in my presentation, it will destroy these components after about 6 minutes. We are aware, said another Directorate member. We have brought duplicate sets. For the next 2 hours, John worked on constructing his design. He modified the medical scanner, reconfigured the power cell, and repurposed the radiation blanket. The aliens watched closely, occasionally asking questions about his choices. Why are you stripping the casing off that component? Asked the silver-skinned alien. I need to access the inner circuitry to rewire it, John explained. The casing just gets in the way. But the casing is designed to protect the sensitive components inside, protested the third Directorate member, a round being with multiple tentacles. Usually, yes, John agreed. But in this case, we need the components to interact with others directly. The protection becomes a limitation. As he worked, John found himself enjoying the challenge. It reminded him of projects he had done back on Earth, working with limited supplies and tools to create something useful. Finally, he stepped back from the table. It's ready. The system will activate when I connect this final wire to the power source. The aliens moved back, some with visible nervousness. Professor Kelther remained calm. Before you activate it, the professor said, explain once more. What will happen? John pointed to the various parts of his creation. When activated, the modified scanner will create a field that allows the system to cycle through dimensional sets, 3 at a time. The power cell will provide energy at an accelerated rate, letting us cycle through all 13 dimensions within seconds. The radiation blanket has been reconfigured to contain any quantum instabilities during the transitions. And after 6 minutes? Prompted Professor Kelther. The power cell will be depleted, the scanner will burn out, and the blanket will lose its containment properties, John said. The system will shut down, but by then, it will have resolved the paradox effects. The Science Directorate members exchanged glances. The silver-skinned one nodded. Proceed. John connected the final wire. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a low hum filled the room. The modified scanner began to glow with a pulsing blue light. The radiation blanket, now shaped into a dome over the other components, shimmered with energy patterns. One of the Directorate members held up a device John didn't recognize. "It's working," the alien said, sounding amazed. The dimensional cycling is functioning exactly as he described. They watched as the system continued to operate. The humming grew louder, and the blue glow became more intense. After about 4 minutes, parts of the scanner began to smoke slightly. "The components are reaching thermal limits," John warned. "It should last another 2 minutes before shutdown." Professor Kelther moved closer, studying the readings on his own monitoring device. Fascinating. The dimensional stability is maintained despite the crude cycling method. At 5 minutes and 30 seconds, the power cell began to make a high-pitched whine. "It's almost done," John said. Exactly 6 minutes and 8 seconds after activation, there was a soft pop. The blue glow faded and the humming stopped. The scanner was partially melted, the power cell was dark and empty, and the radiation blanket had lost its shimmer, but, according to the Directorate members' instruments, the Krell paradox conditions they had been monitoring were completely resolved. "It worked," said the silver-skinned alien, turning to face John. "Your solution, while destructive to the equipment, successfully resolved the paradox." Professor Calther's breathing apparatus hissed softly. "As I told the class, Mr. Carter's approach is unorthodox but functional." The round, tentacled alien approached John. "Human Carter, the Directorate has a proposal for you. We would like you to join a special research team studying alternative approaches to traditional Confederation engineering problems." John was surprised. "Me? But I'm just a student. I don't even have my Earth degree yet, let alone Confederation credentials." "Which makes your perspective all the more valuable," the alien replied. "You are not yet fully shaped by either Earth or Confederation educational systems. You see problems differently." "What would this involve?" John asked. "You would continue your studies but also participate in research sessions twice per week. You would be presented with problems that have resisted traditional solutions to see if your outside-the-box thinking might yield results." John thought about it. The idea was exciting, but also a little intimidating. "Would other humans be involved?" "We are extending similar invitations to several of your species," the silver-skinned alien said. "We believe the human perspective has much to offer the Confederation." Professor Kelther moved his hover platform closer to John. "This is why the exchange program was created, Mr. Carter. Not just for humans to learn from us, but for us to learn from humans." John smiled. "Then I accept. I'd be happy to help." Later that evening, John told his roommates about the invitation. They were impressed. "The Science Directorate rarely takes interest in students," Zillox said, gas sacs pulsating rapidly. "You must have really impressed them," Telmer added. Vrika's crystal body glowed brightly. "I have been thinking about your solution, John. Would you teach us more about this human approach to problem solving?" John nodded. "Sure, but it might be easier to show you than to explain it." He picked up his tablet and pulled up a new project. "Let's start with something simple. Here's a problem from one of my Earth engineering classes. The traditional solution takes 12 steps, but I found a way to do it in 7. As John began to explain his approach, he realized something important was happening. It wasn't just about humans learning from aliens anymore. The exchange was going both ways. Maybe that was the most valuable lesson of all, different perspectives. Working together could solve problems that neither could solve alone. 2 months passed since John joined the special research team. He now split his time between regular classes and research sessions with the Science Directorate. His work with the Directorate was challenging but exciting. They presented him with problems that had puzzled Confederation scientists for years, seeking his human perspective. John wasn't the only human on the team. Maria from Brazil and Amir from Egypt had also been invited. Together they formed what the aliens called the Deathworlder think tank. Though never to their faces, today John sat in a large meeting room with scientists from 12 different species. They were discussing a problem with the station's water recycling system. The filtration membranes keep failing when processing certain waste compounds, explained Chief Engineer Lavox, a tall insectoid being. We've tried 17 different membrane compositions without success. John studied the diagrams on the screen. Why do you keep trying to find a membrane that can handle all waste types? Why not create a pre-sorting system that directs different wastes to specialized filters? The room fell silent. Lavox's antennae twitched. That would require additional equipment, additional space, additional energy, But it would work, pointed out. Sometimes a slightly less efficient solution that actually works is better than continuing to search for a perfect solution that might not exist. After the meeting, John returned to his quarters to find his roommates waiting for him. Over the past weeks, they had become genuinely interested in human approaches to problems. John had been teaching them what he called Human Problem Solving 101. We have news. Vrika announced, crystal body pulsing with bright colors that John had learned meant excitement. We have been invited to participate in the Confederation engineering competition. That's great, John said, sitting down at his desk. What's the challenge? Zilox's gas sacs expanded. Teams must design and build a device that can safely extract energy from unstable neutron pockets without causing a cascade reaction. It is considered one of the most difficult challenges, Telmer added. No first-year team has ever placed in the top rankings. Are you asking me to join your team? John asked. Actually, Vrika said, lights flickering in what John now recognized as nervousness, we were hoping you would teach us more of your human problem-solving methods so we can approach this challenge differently. John felt a surge of pride. His roommates didn't just want his help. They wanted to learn his way of thinking. I'll do better than that, John said. I'll help you prepare, but I won't join your team. This is your chance to show what you've learned. For the next 2 weeks, John worked with his roommates in their free time. He taught them to question basic assumptions, to consider resource trade-offs, and to value functional solutions over theoretically perfect ones. In emergency situations, humans often use what we call triage, John explained one evening. It means focusing resources where they'll do the most good, even if that means accepting losses elsewhere. That seems harsh, Telmer said, skin rippling with concern. It can be, John agreed. But when resources are limited and time is short, it's often the best approach. The day of the competition arrived. John wished his roommates luck as they headed to the engineering labs. He had his own work with the research team but promised to attend the judging later. When John entered the competition hall that afternoon, he found it buzzing with excitement. 20 teams had presented their designs, and the judges were now deliberating. John spotted his roommates standing near their project. They looked nervous but also determined. He made his way over to them. How did it go? He asked. We finished our presentation 30 minutes ago, Zilox said, gas sacs swirling rapidly. The judges asked many questions. They seemed surprised by our approach, Vrika added. John examined their device. It looked nothing like the other projects in the hall. While most teams had built large, complex machines with multiple safety systems, his roommates had created something much simpler. You used a dispersed extraction method, John observed, studying their design. Multiple small extractors instead of one large one. Telmer nodded. If one extractor fails, the others continue working. No single point of failure. And we added manual backup systems, Vrika said proudly. Not elegant, but functional, John finished, smiling. Even if primary systems fail, you can still complete the mission. Just then, an announcement echoed through the hall. All teams, please gather for the results. They joined the crowd near the judges' platform. The head judge, a respected engineer named Dravix, stepped forward. This year's competition has shown remarkable technical skill from all teams, Dravix began. But we judges were particularly impressed by one team's unconventional approach. John felt his roommates tense beside him. Most teams focused on creating perfect containment systems to prevent any possibility of a cascade reaction, Dravix continued. But one team chose a different path. They accepted that in real-world conditions, perfect containment might fail. So they designed a system that could continue functioning even after partial failures. The crowd murmured with interest. This approach reflects a philosophy we have not often seen in Confederation engineering, preparing for failure rather than assuming it can always be prevented. Dravix paused. The winning team is ... Team Nexus Quad. John's roommates froze in shock. Zilox's gas sacks inflated to twice their normal size. Vrika's crystal body glowed so brightly that nearby aliens had to shield their eyes. Telmer's skin cycled through a rainbow of colors. We won? Telmer whispered in disbelief. John grinned and pushed them forward. Go on, go accept your award. As his roommates moved toward the platform, a senior science directorate member approached John. Your influence is evident in their design, the alien observed. John shook his head. I just showed them a different way of thinking. The design is entirely theirs. Nevertheless, this is precisely why the exchange program was created, the alien said. Different perspectives working together create better solutions than either could alone. Later that evening, they celebrated in their quarters. John's roommates couldn't stop talking about the judges' comments and the attention their design had received. Several faculty members have requested permission to study our approach, Vrika said, crystal body still glowing brightly, and the Science Directorate wants us to write a paper explaining our methodology, added Zilox. John listened with pride. In just a few months, his roommates had gone from dismissing his ideas to embracing them. I have a question, Telmer said suddenly. You have taught us much about human problem-solving. Is there something from our approaches that you find valuable? John thought about it. Absolutely. Your attention to detail, your thorough analysis before acting, your consideration of long-term consequences, those are all things humans sometimes overlook in our rush to find quick solutions. So perhaps the best approach is a combination? Vrika suggested. The thoroughness of Confederation methods with the adaptability of human ones, John nodded. I think that's why this exchange program is so important. We all have something to teach and something to learn. As the celebration continued, John reflected on how much had changed since he first arrived at Nexus Station. He had come expecting to learn from advanced alien civilizations, and he had. But he had also discovered that Earth's harsh environment had given humans unique strengths, creativity, adaptability, and a willingness to try unconventional solutions the Confederation needed. Those qualities just as much as humans needed the aliens' knowledge and technology. Different worlds had created different ways of thinking, and together they could solve problems that neither could solve alone. What had started with a seemingly impossible homework assignment had grown into something much more important. A true exchange of ideas that would benefit both humans and aliens for generations to come. That night, as his roommates finally settled into their various rest states, John sent a message to his family back on Earth. He told them about winning the competition and about his work with the Science Directorate. At the end, he added a simple thought that summed up everything he had learned. It turns out that growing up on a death world taught us something valuable after all. Sometimes the harshest environments create the most creative solutions.